Scott Sagan, co-director here at Center for National Security Cooperation. And it's my pleasure to have Brian Rathbun, professor of political science at USC, here today to speak to us. His most recent book is called Diplomacy's Value, Cornell University Press, 2014. Actually, that's his second most recent book. Since then, he's also published Reasoning of State, Cambridge University Press 2019, which won the 2018-19 Best Book Award from the Foreign Policy section of the American Political Science Association. And since he has so much writing to do and is so prolific, he has a new book coming out next year on right and wrong international relations, evolutionary ethics, moral revolutions, and the the nature of power politics. Please join me in thanking Brian for coming here.
Thank you. Okay, so my mic is on, just double checking.
Yeah.
All right, thank you all for coming. I know it's probably the last week of classes. It's 3:30. It's Thursday too, right? Which is the weekend by academic standards. So thanks very much for coming. This is weird because it's the first time I've ever presented this book in any form. Yeah, because I wrote it during COVID and I didn't do any virtual stuff. And so the bizarre thing is that, yeah.
You're going to stay up here because I'm seeing what people on.
Okay, they can't see me. Oh,
suddenly you're wandering off.
Okay, I
So
rove.
keep walking with 10 in front.
Okay. Yeah, maybe maybe I'll do this. Anyways, yeah, the first time I've ever presented this, so this is really great. But and I have probably one more chance to make some revisions. But yeah, the book is coming out in I think in June. They're telling me. Okay, this is not an ordinary book. In the sense, and so I'm not going to give an ordinary talk, in the sense that I'm not going to give you a presentation with some kind of theoretical scaffolding, some deduced expectations, and then some evidence. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to overload you with both theory and evidence and move it back and forward between the two. So we're going to talk about evolution, and we're going to talk about Hitler, and we're going to talk about Russian and Chinese public opinion, and we're going to talk about blushing, right? It's going to be fun. At least I hope it's going to be fun. That's my goal, is that this is be fun. Okay, and it's not an ordinary talk because it's not an ordinary book, and it's not an ordinary book because I'm not really trying to explain a phenomenon or an outcome or a set of outcomes. Basically, I'm trying to offer a new characterization. I mean, you know, I guess in its most arrogant way, the nature of power politics, which is to say, I'm going to try to characterize or upend certain conventional wisdoms that aren't everyone's conventional wisdoms, but are a lot of our conventional wisdoms. Particularly about this subject of right and wrong, of morality in international relations, which I think is actually the oldest question really in international relations. In some ways, international relations begins with this question of ethics. Okay, so it takes on one of the big truisms of international relations, the things that everyone at least has to be introduced to in their intro IR class. Foreign realm, or foreign affairs is this amoral realm where normal ethical norms know no place. So morality's primary function is to restrain excessive egoism, place restraints on selfish behavior. And so egoism is the driving force of international politics. So therefore, ethical considerations must be largely absent, right? And in this view, our private morality simply can't be applied to this public sphere. There's a distinction between what's right and wrong in the public sphere and in the private sphere. In the public sphere, essentially, you can do things and they can be ethically sanctioned that wouldn't normally be in our daily lives. The way I put it pithily in the book, what happens in anarchy stays in anarchy, right? Okay, so, and if you're, just to get some definitional questions out of the way, what do I mean by morality? That's a big question, right? I'm going to take a working definition from Jonathan Haidt: interlocking sets of values, practices, institutions, and evolved psychological mechanisms that work together to suppress or regulate selfishness and make social life possible. The core of morality is to regulate selfishness, right? Excessive egoism, as I call it. All right, so conventional wisdom captured here in this, which is I think is going to be the image in the book from the Asian, I don't know what one calls it, like maxim: see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil, right? And this is kind of my pithy, or my playful way of saying this is kind of the conventional wisdom, right? So here we have, like, I don't see any morality. This is like Ken Waltz, right? I know what you're talking about, but there's nothing to see here. Here we have like Cohen. He knows there's morality. He just won't say it. And then there's like, this is Mearsheimer. I'm not listening. I'm not listening. No matter what you say, it can't be true. I'm not updating, right? That's Mearsheimer. I thought that was kind of fun. I just came up with that. Okay, so
Science joke, I must say.
okay, the empirical study of all right, so that's the conventional wisdom. Now, the empirical study of morality up to now, right, and that's a broad characterization, but still I think it's defensible, which I think of mostly in terms of the norms literature, tries to say, no, there is morality in international politics. It's developing over time, right? So it's a glass half full, glass half empty debate. No, we see things like decolonization, we see human rights, we see all of these good things. So there's some progress, but still it's a debate essentially about, it's a glass half full, glass half empty debate. And I think that they're missing a big thing, which is that virtually everything in international politics is moral, right? What we need to do, though, is we need to understand some moral mechanisms that can't be reduced to what I think is the standard sense of morality, which is a liberal cosmopolitan sense of morality. When liberals say there's morality, they say this cosmopolitan sense is growing. When not conservatives, but realists, sometimes conservatives, say there isn't, they're basically saying the same thing. We can't expect everyone to have these normal bourgeois Western values. They're having a debate about the same thing. It's just a debate about how far that's gone. And I'm saying that's not the only thing that there is when it comes to morality. Okay, so what are we missing? I think we're missing two things. And this is why I think we miss that there's virtually morality everywhere, especially even in, or I should say, even in, or especially in power politics. Okay, we're focusing on moral conscience, our desire to do good for others, to the neglect of moral condemnation, right? Our desire, our response to what we perceive to be the unethical behavior of others, right? So we're focusing on, do states do good, rather than what do states do and how often do they feel that others have done them wrong, have done bad to them, because that can unleash dynamics that are fundamentally different than simply an amoral dispute over interests. So we're shifting from right to wronged, right? And that's the moral condemnation piece. What we see is that there's ubiquitous, like international politics is as full as ordinary life with moral condemnation. How dare you did that to me, right? You've acted in an extremely egoistic way, in a way that I find outrageous. Okay, and we see that those kind of, and that can create dynamics, moralized dynamics that are actually much more destructive than even the realist might think, right? When everything is just about power and interest. Second, I think that the morality and ethics literature hasn't really come to terms with moral principles that operate at the level of the group, which is what Jonathan Haidt and Jesse Graham in this now famous moral inventory call binding moral foundations, the morality that binds and keeps groups together. And these are particularly important for international relations because foreign affairs are a matter of intergroup interaction. Okay, we know things that like nationalism is important, but we don't really pull apart nationalism except for to say that, well, some people feel that their national interest is more important than others. Okay, there's all kinds of moral dynamics that binding morality bring into play, particularly because of the deference to authority and in-group loyalty that are part of those conservative moral foundations. So now none of this is to say, when I say morality is everywhere, it's not to say that everyone is always acting morally. In fact, if everyone acting morally, we wouldn't even use the terms. It wouldn't be a concept in our mind. That morality arose, I'm going to make the case, right? Or others have made the case. I'm going to make the case for them, right? Precisely to regulate this kind of excessive egoism. And yet at the same time, even though we don't always act ethically, everyone is always operating under an ethical shadow. People are always judging other people for their ethics. Even authoritarian regimes are being judged by their subjects about whether their rule is just and legitimate and right and fair. Now, they might not be able to do anything about it, but they're judging, right? Okay, which is another way of saying nothing in international politics is just business. Just like, oh, you know, I know, well, Poland wanted Germany or Germany wanted Poland, and that's a shame, really. They're just business, right? Of course they were going to take that. They're interested in a line. No, that's not how things work. It's not how things have ever worked. But we're missing this because we're thinking about morality I think, in a constricted way. All right, okay, so now how on earth do you go about making the case for this argument? This is a big argument to make, right? What is it to say something's ubiquitous? How do I prove something is ubiquitous, right? All right, so that was the tough part. Now, the whole impetus, or where I started, was from the realization we can think that someone means, my realization that when we say someone's threatening or someone wants to harm us, that automatically comes with a moral judgment. We can't say someone is threatening or harming for us and just going, it's just business. We always automatically are making a moral inference about that individual. And the same thing is true as states. And yet, if we see a bear in the woods, right, and it's circling around and wants to take our picnic basket, I guess this is Yogi Bear in my mind, it wants to take our business basket, we're not judging Yogi Bear morally, right? It's a threat, but it's not morally judged. But human beings, if someone's going to take your picnic basket, like, you can't take my picnic basket, that's wrong. Okay, all right, so what that means is that, and this is the first way I thought about operationalizing this idea, harm and threat, right? Particularly physical harm, physical threat, right, are inherently moralized. That we can't talk about harm being threatened or being harmed without casting or without morally condemning someone at the same time. So the idea I had was that this is going to be connected through speech, that we can capture the implicit moralization of threat and harm through speech. And I'm looking around for something to do or a way of testing this, and I come across a method that called word embeddings. All right, what does this mean? Okay, so basically the intuition behind word embeddings is super computationally complex, but actually extremely easy to conceptualize. The idea is that a word, you know a word's meaning by the company that it keeps, the words, the context that it tends to appear in. It's essentially its buddy words. And and you can use what's called a method developed here at Stanford called it's called GLOVE. It's called the Global Vectors for Word Representation. So basically what you're doing is you're taking some huge corpora of text of your choice, right? And you're basically fitting a multidimensional space and locating every word in your corpora of text in a multidimensional space based on whether that word appears in the same context as other words. And so what do you like? If you could expect, you can use it to capture all kinds of implicit assumptions. You can use it to capture the fact, for instance, that certain professions are gendered, right? So if you find the word nurse and it's a lot closer to a cluster of words capturing maleness, for lack of a better word, like he, right, him, right, all of those kinds of things, you know that that word has a gendered connotation. You can actually observe over time. You have longitudinal data. Okay, so basically what we're doing is we have this, we take a corpora of texts, right? We fit these models, we find like this n-dimensional space, like 200-300 different dimensions in space, something you can't actually capture in a picture, right? But and those words are located in that multidimensional space through these things that are called embeddings. Like, where is this word embedded? And that's associated with a vector, which is just a fancy word for a point in this multidimensional space. And you're like, okay, that word's here. And then I want to see, for instance, if I find a bunch of words, he, him, and a bunch of words, she, her, and I find the word, doctor, is it closer to she? Or is it closer to he? And does that change over time? You can do that. But in any case, you want to find that position in space, and you do that by basically estimating something called the cosine similarity, which is just another way of capturing distance in this multidimensional space. All right. All this means is that we can create a dimension in space, a bunch of harm words that cluster, a bunch of safe words that also cluster. That's a dimension in space. And we take all these moral terms and we locate them and we figure out which end are they closer to. And what that is going to mean is that every time if I'm right, every time you're talking about harm or threat so a harm dimension, threat dimension, every time you were talking about blowing up and destroying and all those things, that's going to be associated with a bunch of moral pejoratives, immoral, insincere, ingenuine, unfair, right? It's not going to be this phlegmatic, like, I guess our interests don't align, right? And that's what we wanted to try to do. So we create this we create these harm dimensions and these threat dimensions. We do it on 3 separate, a guy named Caleb Pomeroy. He was who I recruited to this project because he was the expert in IR on word embeddings. He was a second-year graduate student, right? But I found him and I recruited him, and he's great, and he's applying for a postdoc here, I think, so you should hire him. That's my plug. Anyways, Caleb instantly understands what we're trying to do. So we do it on 3 different corpora. One of them is what we call the UN General Assembly speech, which is capturing all the speeches made by heads of state from like 1965 to 2018, right? All public, right? But essentially all the leaders of the world. Then we have some documents that Eric Min gave us, which are foreign relations of the United States documents from different periods, about 16,000 documents, right? And then we've got what are called quotidian texts. That's this glove vector representation model. The people at Stanford here, that's what they originally used to train their, or that's the corpus they used to test basically whether their word embeddings framework misses. And that's basically like meant to represent essentially the entire English language, right? And we call that quotidian because it's capturing our moral senses of everyday people and everyday speech. Okay, so what do? We project, we take a list of moral words from psychological studies that say, when we ask you about this trait, do you think of that as being important in figuring out whether someone's moral or immoral, right? And we take the top, I don't know, 20, 50, or 20, 30 of these, I can't remember at this point, and then we project them on these dimensions. And we want to see, like, do words like principled fall on, or do bad words, cruel, inhuman, unjust, do they project onto the harm dimension, which is another way of saying, do we judge harm? We do, right? And the opposite. And here's the thing, it works like a charm. Like, we only misclassify in a statistically significant way 3 terms in all of this, right? Which by textual standards is just like remarkable. So says Caleb.
What are the words?
So these are all the words, right? Inequitable, inhumane, forgiving, faithful.
Which are the ones that are
trustworthy.
miscategorized? Though?
Sorry?
Which are the ones that are miscategorized?
Oh, I can't remember. We'd have to see. It's going to be like ones that I think, I can't remember. It's in the text. I will look it up. They don't seem to be apropos of it.
Yeah, ethic probably should.
Right.
You wouldn't think that being in the positive harm
Exactly.
category. Okay.
And some of them are just statistically different from 0. So there's a lot of these that we can't really tell. And Caleb does a method. I can't remember how he did it to judge the statistical significance of that. That's in the appendix of this, which came out in IO this summer. Okay, what we're really excited about is that it doesn't just get how normal people think about this. It also gets how or people beyond the English-speaking world at heads of state level, and it captures private documents too. This is something that is occurring in the US government, right? Okay, so that's the first piece. All right. So next part, why is it that harm and threat are moralized, and why is it that immorality is so ubiquitous? Well, here's when I went into evolutionary psychology and the evolution of morality, that there's something about human nature, and hence the nature in the book, about biology, that human beings are moral animals. So one of the things that makes humans humans is their morality, that it's ingrained, right? Which is not to say that everyone's always doing the right thing, right? Like I said before, we wouldn't have morality if everyone was doing the right thing. We wouldn't even have the concept of right and wrong. Right and wrong is used to judge, right? And it's meant to police. It's meant to bring people back to the right path. And yet at the same time, we witness this remarkable universality in certain moral principles, right? Particularly the notion that giving to others and avoiding harm to them is just, right? Fairness, reciprocity, a bunch of these things. Okay. All right. So how do we think about morality from an evolutionary standpoint? Okay, that morality emerges under conditions of anarchy, precisely because it's an adaptive function in helping promote individual well-being, right? It seems weird, right? So it's not despite anarchy, as structural realists maintain, or these other rationalists, so much of international relations, but it's because of anarchy that humans have an ethical sense, right? Okay, and this is because morality is functional. That's the evolutionary part of it, right? If something's universal, it must have certain some adaptive need. But it's a puzzle. It's always been a big puzzle for the evolutionary psych people, right? How can giving of ourselves, making certain costs or incurring certain costs actually be functionally adaptive? How can it be fitness enhancing? So we understand this when it comes to, say, nurturing our own young or passing on our genes. How does this happen in large groups in which we're not related, right? And basically what they're saying is that it encourages cooperation. Moralities in the intuition here, human beings on their own are kind of helpless in the wild, historically, right? We need other human beings to help us. That the nature of human success is a cooperative social success. Okay, so we have to cooperate, but we have to police bad behavior too. If my intuition is always to be giving, people will walk all over me, right? That pure altruism could never have emerged in as a human trait, right, without this consequent or without this flip side, which is to punish wrongdoing, and not just punish wrongdoing of those who do to us, but that other third parties do to other sides. Now, why might we do this? Well, it's a costly signaling mechanism, right? But it's a costly signaling mechanism. It's different from the rationalist one that we're used to in that it's automatic and intuitive. And that's actually what makes it more adaptive, right? So I don't want to know if I want to cooperate with someone. I want to cooperate with not with someone who I think is going to cooperate because it's in their interest to cooperate. I want to cooperate with someone who feels it's the right thing to do. That's much less monitoring, much less judgment, right? And therefore, the idea is that conscience, that internal clock, the thing that makes us blush when we're found out and embarrassed. I told you we talk about blushing, right? Is actually automatic. And what that is us manifesting our shame to others to show, listen, I actually care what other people think about you or about me. And this is just not me. I didn't mean this, right? Okay, so if we can if we have morality, we are a good partner. And therefore, nice guys did finish last, right? Provided that, because they could develop reputations that would help them both interact with others, but also their reputations in small groups, right? And especially if you police other people's bad behavior on behalf of others, that's an even costlier signal. You're going to put yourself on a line. So nice guys can finish first. But what that means is conscience can't develop without condemnation. We have to have the response to being wronged before we get right, or at least they have to develop simultaneously. Okay. All right. Now, what that means is like, well, how in God's earth would you test that in international relations, right? And in some ways I can't, right? But what I did is I took some arguments that drew on that tradition, that morality is central. Most important, a literature that finds that morality is the biggest thing that we look for in others. Like when we're forming judgments about others, the first thing we try to figure out is whether they're right, whether they're a good person or bad, whether they're honest or dishonest, right? Whether they're fair or whether they're unfair. That's what we do. And then, so people have basically said, well, that makes sense because out in, like, as we evolve, we're looking for people we can rely on. We want to know that we can rely on them when we're not watching them, even though watching them is a big part of the evolution and the enforcement of morality of both of those things. Okay, so how do people do this? Well, basically they ask a bunch of survey respondents, and this starts with Susan Fisk and is pioneered by other people and furthered when they just basically ask people like, when you're like, which of these things is most important to you when you're making a judgment about somebody? And they give you like a list of 100 traits, and morality is always at the top, right? It's not the only one. Competence comes later. Are you organized? Are you intelligent, right? Can you follow through? That would make sense too. But most important thing is whether someone's honest, right? So my thought was like, okay, does this happen in international relations too? If I ask people, what in particular, like what's important for you in judging a threat? What traits are you going to identify? And I can do that in two ways. I can ask people that in terms of other countries. When you're thinking about a country and if it's threatening to you, what do you want to know about its leaders and its people? What attributes are important to you, whether it's threatening? And I can also ask them at the same time in a survey experiment to do the same thing for interpersonal relations. And I want to see if those things are different. Because if anarchy is different, it should be different, right? And it should be that power and resolve and all those things matter a lot more in international relations because those are the things that we think matter in terms of threat perception. Turns out, no. All right, well, with who? With Russians. Okay, right before COVID, thank God, right before COVID, I had an excellent graduate student, spoke Russian. We've been talking about doing a survey together for a long time. And I wanted to do this survey in Russians because I didn't want to talk to a bunch of Americans who moralize everything, right? And we're Western and liberal and all these things too. So we had the right to be, not the right, I should say, we had the luxury of being righteous. I was like, how about some people who aren't associated with these Western values of cosmopolitan liberalism and yet have a history of power politics? How do they think about things? So 2,000 people, March like 9th, I think it was like the day before California shut down, asked them questions. Okay, gave them a prompt, which I don't have up here. If I'm asking you how to proceed or to tell me how you would judge threat, which of these things matter? Randomize people into a condition about countries, another about individuals, and then gave them a set of a variety of things that I thought made sense in the literature of both of threat perception and international relations, but also things we had found in the psychological literature. And basically what happens is that people make this, first of all, honesty, trustworthiness, fairness, and justice. Those two clusters, those two attributes are the most important ways by which people make judgments about threats of countries and of other people. That is, there's no difference between the interpersonal and the international dimension in their minds, right? Second of all, those things are much more important than how resolved you are, how powerful you are, even how culturally sim you are, right? These are basically just counts, right? So the bigger these numbers, the more people answered that. And we see that they're relatively split. So there's no difference in the treatment conditions in terms of how many people said, and the percentage of people said honesty in one, whether they're talking about countries or individuals, right? And they're ranking, this is the order of ranking. It's pretty much consistent all the way down the line. This is a co-occurrence matrix to see if there's certain clusters, and we don't necessarily need to get into that. Okay, now here's some data on China. Again, I just want to see, is this Western thing? I don't want it to be just Western. And so there's two surveys that I got from Ian Johnston. One is the so-called Beijing area survey. Another one I already had the data for, US-Chinese perceptions. Like this is these were mass surveys, not truly representative, but not bad, of Chinese public. The first one, Beijing area survey, asked a bunch of people like, hey, how do you think, what do you think about China and how warlike it is on a scale? I think 0 to 5 or something like this. And then how is that correlated with all these other attributes? So basically, warlike is always associated with immorality. And it doesn't matter whether Chinese are talking about Chinese, whether they're talking about Japan, whether they're talking about the United States. There's no such thing as threat perception without morality. Okay, here's another one. This is from the US Perceptions Project. So this was different. They asked about a bunch of traits that they thought, that respondents thought that the United States had. And let me just give you exactly what they are. Okay, they asked, is the United States greedy, selfish, deceitful, honest, generous, and tolerant? 6 moral attributes that I counted, right? It was 0, 1, so we just added them up. How many bad moral attributes do you have? And then what's the probability of you saying, for instance, that the Taiwan arms sales is an issue of major importance for China, right? And we segregated it by those who had an initial threat perception of the United States as the greatest threat, or the United States is not the greatest threat. And basically what we see is that as you believe the United States has more immoral attributes, the more you converge. These people, the more threatening you perceive the United States, and the more that people converge on this idea that, yeah, these are major issues of importance, right? Morality drives threat perception in, at least at the public opinion level. Okay, everyone still there? It's a lot to go through. All right. So I've been focusing so far on moral foundation and what I call moral screening. We're using morality to screen for threat. Under the presumption that we can treat states as if they're individual units, right? We have some data that suggests that we can, because people are actually doing the same kind of things, interpersonally, internationally, same thing. Now, what allows us to do this? Well, that is what keeps these groups as units. And I think that is this other type of morality that I'm talking about, that morality, binding morality, keeps groups together, it makes them cohesive. Okay, so altruism, charity, benevolence, generosity, these are things that most of us accept as moral, right? But a big point of what Jesse Graham and Jonathan Haidt were trying to get across is that those are what we call liberal values in the West. That's not all that there is to the moral universe, right? There's a lot of things that other people perceive as moral that we might not, deference to authority, in-group loyalty in particular, right? That are moral to lots of people, perhaps more people in the world, and certainly historically, many more people in the world than our current values of generosity to everyone on the basis of on the basis of the notion that everyone is essentially has inherent worth and dignity, that the individual matters. Okay, now notice that deference to authority, in-group loyalty, it's all about the subjugation, or it's just the suppression of selfishness. It's just for the group, right? It's still, though, it's about morality. This is about who do I constrain my own self-interest for? Okay, now there's a lot of debate in evolutionary psych about where binding morality comes from and where in-group bias comes from. And there's two distinct sets of people who really hate each other, right? You thought like the IR paradigm debates were bad, but like these individual level selection and the multi-level selection people, or the group selection people, really hate each other. So I don't really want to get into that. I don't want to talk about where in-group bias comes from, but pretty much everyone believes there's in-group bias, and in-group bias is associated with this greater adherence, self-expressed adherence to these different moralities. What I wanted to do is figure out a little bit more about binding morality than just like, oh, these people believe are less willing to settle or put their nation above others or feel superior. That just didn't feel like enough. Okay, so what do we know about these people with these binding moral values? They have a particular vision of the world. And it's one of what John Duckett calls dangerous world beliefs. We know this from surveys after survey after survey, that the reason why people feel the need to defer to authority and remain cohesive in their group is because they think the outside world is threatening. So both internationally, but also within society. These are the people like, Chicago is falling apart, right? That's a threat thing, right? Like everything, if there isn't strong leadership and order, everything falls apart, right? But what is that? That's a perception of the world that there's bad people, and those bad people have to be kept in order, which is to say, moral condemnation is baked into the thing. And the more you think that about your home society, the more you think that's true abroad. If I see threats every time I walk down the city streets in an urban city in America, the more likely I am to think that China is up to no good, right? So that's the association that we constantly see, which is to say that moral condemnation makes this kind of conservative morality work. And it's second order moral beliefs, not my beliefs about what's right, but my beliefs about whether you are right and just and good, and therefore whether I can trust you, whether you'll exploit me, etc. Okay, so I call this authoritarian ideology, right? Just because it works so well within the authoritarian mind as we have come to understand it. Actually, work done here, oftentimes started here. Okay, this goes hand in hand with what we call in IR the deterrence model. Right? You remember Jervis, deterrence model, spiral model, right? Got to show resolve. Why do you have to show resolve? Because people are so bad, or the bad guys are so bad, that you can't give them any quarter, or they will just exploit you. They will walk over you. They are so excessively selfish that the only way to deal with them is through a firm hand. That's authoritarian ideology. It's also the deterrence model. Deterrence model people, the people who think that we need to show the Russians we mean business, right? Are the same people, right? Who think you need to show criminals that you won't put up with this crap and you're going to send them away forever. It's the same mindset, right? It's based on the notion of good people versus bad people. All right. Well, this has big implications. What we're going to talk about here is Germany, World War I, war termination. All right, so deterrence model thinkers, people who think that the bad guys are just bad and the only way that you can stop them is to show them that you mean business, right? They think that everything is a commitment problem. So when you're fighting, you can't basically settle because the other side is just going to use it as a ceasefire and take advantage of you. What's the only way to actually provide security from these bad guys? It's to create buffer zones. It's to completely subjugate their populations. You have to do more. You have to fight longer, right? Because everything is a commitment problem. All right, so therefore, binding morality, I think, is going to make it hard for people to settle conflicts. The other thing is they venerate resolve. Binding moralists have a set of moral attributes that other types of moralizing or moral values don't get us to. That resolve itself becomes a moral virtue. And that's what I want to show you some evidence here. Now, this has, because think about it. If you're in a group and you're fighting and some people start to say, you know, I'm not really feeling this anymore. And I got my family back home and I think I'm just going to go if you don't mind. Maybe like, no, you're going to get back here. What have you done? It's treason. You have betrayed the loyalty of your in-group, right? And you've done that by not demonstrating the persistence, the resolve necessary to prevail in this dangerous world against this dangerous bad guy. It's a bad guy. It's not just dangerous, it's a bad guy. So resolve becomes this virtue. So I wanted to test that. But in any case, both of these things lead to natural escalatory dynamics in conflicts. If you have binding moralists, you're in trouble. Because what's going to happen is that you're never going to think that enough is enough, right? You're going to venerate resolve above all other things, including the pragmatic calculation of whether a fight is worth fighting anymore. And there's this additional dynamic, which is binding moralists want to celebrate and the contributions of the fallen. It has to have been for something. They showed us their loyalty. We owe them. And so you keep fighting long beyond, I think, long beyond when is rational to do so. And that's what I try to do in the book in a case study of Germany, but in World War I. But here I just want to show you the veneration of resolve. This is American respondents. So it's kind of a similar thing to what I did before. I asked people to judge what kind of traits or which traits are important for judging whether somebody is moral or not, right? And so we know the familiar ones, fair and just, honest and trustworthy, generous and kind, compassionate and forgiving. Everyone thinks those are moral, right? The question is whether these binding values, those we also know are moral, the resolve ones. I took 4 separate resolve variables and basically added those as choices. And I said, okay, when you think about whether someone is moral on a scale of 0 to 10, I think, how important are these things in you judging their morality? What I wanted to know was, first of all, do people with dangerous world beliefs judge these as more indicative of morality? And they do, like strongly. I also had a couple of randomizations in there. I figured that it would be more important for leaders to have these attributes because this is because your leaders are supposed to, in this authoritarian ideology, lead you through these dangerous times, right? So, and lo and behold, it's more importantly in aggregate, right, for the sample as a whole, right? This is just an experimental treatment. That leaders, this is thought to be a particularly moral virtue, or it's moral. It's a virtue that we use to judge the morality of our leaders more so than lay people. And another experimental treatment here, peace versus war. Here, this one doesn't matter as much as I would have thought. I would have thought war, it creates this situation where it's a sense of, yes, we have to everyone to the front and we all have to give it our best. And therefore, resolve would come to be more moral in a wartime setting. Turns out that's only true of persistence and resilience. Now, this could be these are both positive. It could be just a statistical power issue. But in any case, I feel very comfortable saying there's a moral dimension to resolve. Resolve is this thing we talk about in every single formal model that we do nowadays, right? And it's completely phlegmatic. It's like, oh, it's resolved. You just have it, right? No, it's a moral virtue for some, and that's why everyone yells at people when they back down at audience cost experiments, right? That's why the people get mad because what? They're falling down morally. They're not doing what's right. They're not standing up for their country. So these places that we think we're not talking about morality, we're definitely talking about morality. There's morality all over audience costs and all over the war termination literature. Okay, that's the last piece I'd like to talk about. Let me tell you a bit about Germany during World War I. Okay, we're gonna switch gears. I'm having fun. I hope people are having fun. Okay, why the hell did Germany fight so long? It's been a big puzzle. And there have been a bunch of accounts recently, I would say recently over the last 20 years. That's recent for me, right? It's probably for you guys, maybe not, right? For the last 20 years, we've been talking about what the hell is Germany doing? Why are they fighting so long? And it's part of this war termination literature, right? When do states settle? When do they finally say, okay, fine, it's enough, it's enough. Okay, so there's a set of rational arguments to basically say, war is incomplete information. A certain somebody came up with this idea, right? He may or may not be in this building right now. Okay, and that one doesn't seem to work. So then there are a bunch of people saying, well, that one doesn't work all the time for Germany. Maybe there's something else going on with Germany. Okay, Dan Ryder says it's a commitment problem, right? It's because Germany basically couldn't find a credible commitment because it thought that if it were to settle, that it would just be fighting the next war again, and therefore better to continue fighting because the option of, say, not taking Belgium at that particular point in time, because it provides a landing base for the Brits and to come and take down Germany, right? You have to have Belgium, so no deal without Belgium, so we keep fighting. That's the commitment problem. Okay, there's a commitment problem logic in the generals, or in the conservative parties, the nationalist parties, and in the generals' mindset. You see it all over the place. We can't do this because we have to have Belgium, because otherwise we can't defend in the future against this. Well, guess what? These people are nuts, right? The generals of World War I in Germany are crazy. They're authoritarian lunatics, right? And I say that, I try to avoid pejorative implications for this, but this is really lunacy. So yes, what Ryder is describing a dynamic that's true at the upper levels of the German decision-making, but they're all authoritarians, right? So of course they think that the other side is evil, and the only way to ever provide any kind of German security is to create these huge buffer zones and squash the Allies as much as possible. So therefore, even when you're losing, you don't settle. All right, so yeah, commitment problem, but a commitment problem for a particular ideology, and an ideology that's associated, that has morality baked in, an image of the adversary is intractably hostile, and an environment of great threat in which the only thing you can do is hunker down and win the war by not demonstrating any by completely demonstrating resolve. Okay, this gets to the next point, right? Well, you can't even negotiate under this mindset because negotiation is a signal of weakness. So what do we have in Germany in 1917? Everyone's getting a little tired, right? They're like, can we eat again? Because it's been, I don't know, 3 months since I've had a good meal. And so the left-wing parties in Germany and the centrists get together, pass what's called the peace resolution, expressing the majority of the Reichstag, which is to say that we want a peace without annexation, which is to say without all these crazy things that the authoritarian generals want. And therefore, and that we should begin immediate peace negotiations to that end. Well, what does the right wing do? They say, you're giving away to the sword of the adversaries, right? You can't do that. And we won't even begin to broach this subject. And they did briefly with this submarine thing, and it didn't, or sorry, right before Germany began submarine warfare, but it was botched in a particular way because it wouldn't actually give any moral ground to the side. We could talk about that. All right, third thing. What else might rationally explain why the Germans keep fighting when they shouldn't fight? All right, so this is the argument that everyone knows as like the selector argument. Again, has some association with this particular institution, a certain big tower behind us. And that is, well, there must be a subset of people for whom this was rational. And it's rational for the members of the old regime, right? Because they're basically worried that if you lose, people are going to be really upset for fighting and getting nothing out of it. And they're going to revolt and they're going to cut your head off. Right. So, okay, yeah, we're going to lose, or probably going to lose, but it doesn't hurt us to keep fighting because we're dead either way. So let's keep fighting, because what's going to happen otherwise? We're going to get the overthrow of the regime, and we're going to lose all our pretty medals. They're just going to take away the pretty medals. They'll all go bye-bye, right? And we can't walk around German society and have our position of authority. Okay, it's hard for me to put this strong enough. There is no evidence for this claim. This is the weakest claim in German historiography that I can find, right? You find over and over 2 quotes completely taken out of context about Germans going about Hindenburg and maybe Ludendorff, the 2 German generals saying, we can't live with this franchise, because what's going on? The German left is tired. They're fighting, right? The working class is bearing the brunt of the war at home and abroad, right? They never wanted annexation. They made it clear from the very beginning. And so these baubles that the gambling for resurrection argument says are being offered to the working class are things that they're refusing from the very beginning. They're like, you know what we really want for this war to end, right? But the Germans are like, no, we got to keep fighting. And so the German left says, okay, what we want is we want a reform of the Prussian franchise, which basically allowed, it was that and a parliamentarization of the executive branch, which is to say a set of ministers that weren't only accountable to the Kaiser, but were themselves members of the parliament and could be dismissed by parliament. That's the 2 things that they want. And the right, lo and behold, says that is crazy. We will never do that. But why do they do that? I think it's authoritarian morality, because the way that we look at their internal discussions, when they're confronted with these domestic reform ideas, what are they so opposed by? They're opposed by the fact that people would ask of these things now. And that shows that they are not willing to commit. It's an act of excessive class egoism. They're disgusted by the immorality of what they're asking for. It has nothing to do with like them thinking down the road like, oh, I might personally benefit from the perpetuation of the regime. And of course, what happens? They bring about the very outcome that they're most scared of, which is the fall of the monarchy, right? Who knows this? The chancellor knows this, Bethmann Hollweg. And what they do is they get rid of them. Bethmann Hollweg says, you got to make these pragmatic concessions because you're going to lose this war otherwise. And you're going to bring about the end of the monarchy that you care the most about. And they're not interested. Now, I think it's all about morality. Okay, last thing. Hitler. So why did I choose Germany? Well, because I speak German, and so it's easy, right? But also, the reason is because if you're trying to make the claim that there's so much morality that we're not even beginning to see, especially in power politics, who do you think of when you think about the big bad boys, right? Especially historically, it's Germany, right? They're excessive status seekers, right? They're overly aggressive and expansionistic. They're associated with Machtpolitik and this idea that there is no morality. The very idea that morality doesn't play a role in international affairs is to some degree traceable to Germany, von Treitschke and all that. Okay, so I chose Germany for this reason. But then the question, of course, then comes like, yeah, but that guy Hitler, you're not saying Hitler's moral, right? So no, I'm not. Just so, hold your breath here. No, I'm not saying Hitler's moral. The question is like, what is Hitler then, right? Because a lot of people say continuity between everything that happens in Germany and Hitler. Hitler's just a slightly crazier and more extreme version of old German nationalists. And I say that's wrong. And what the way that the continuity argument is masking a lot of change. What's changing is the nature of conservative ideology, and it's demoralization, or stripping the morality out of it. And what Hitler does is he takes old German nationalism of the kind that prevailed in the Wilhelmine nationalism, and he changes it from an ethnic, or really, I should say, a cultural, national, linguistic basis, and he makes it racial. And in so doing, brings with it a set of assumptions about what morality is and isn't. And actually what Hitler says is morality is a fiction, it doesn't exist. Based on actually a very crude evolutionary idea that we're all just animals, animals aren't moral, so we're not moral. So therefore, humanitarian morality is a social construction, it's a sentimental. And that therefore the way that our German foreign policy has to be ruthlessly expansionistic because it's all about material, it's all about providing for your population. And the only way you do that is expand. And so it's not expanding for defensive borders, it's expanding for resources that you take for your population. And that's all it is. And so Hitler is, of course, what we should expect if those all see no evil people are wrong. He should be the exception. But he's not the, sorry, he should be the norm, but he's not the norm, he's the exception. But why is Hitler the exception if he's endorsing a power politic point of view that we oftentimes take, or a lot of realists take, cruder ones, I mind, as at face value, right? He is the exception. And the reason he's exceptional is because he drains all morality out of all decision making. And yet, even Hitler operates under the shadow of morality. What do I mean by that? Not the behavior during the Second World War, but in the 20s, all what we know about Hitler thinks about evolution and morality comes from his speeches in the 20s and some writings, Mein Kampf too, right? And his second book, which is never published. Why wasn't that second book ever published? Because Hitler finally has a big, he participates in a 1929 movement against the Dawes Plan, and he coalesces with all these German nationalists complaining about the unjust behavior or treatment of Germany. Okay, what had they done? What had they done so wrong? Well, in Hitler's eyes, what we know privately, nothing. They didn't do anything wrong. There is no such thing as right and wrong. What they did was unacceptable because it kept Germany down, but he would have done the same thing. But Hitler won't say that publicly. Okay, he won't say that publicly. So all of his references to evolution, the absence of morality, as of 1930, disappear. I mean, disappear. They're gone. And he won't, and that's because I think he's in a place politically where domestically he has to care about, well, we're not going to write for that guy who says there's no morality, right? Because even conservatives don't buy that. And he can't say that internationally because then they're going to know he's a threat. So he is operating under the shadow of morality. Anyways, so the big takeaway, well, I'll let you decide, but one of them is that I want to end this association between morality and, or I should say, I want to upend how we traditionally think about morality in a couple ways. Some of you seen. The other is that morality is somehow only a product of our minds. Whereas I think morality is material reality, because morality evolves in order to help us regulate material conflicts. And so that therefore this traditional dichotomy we have between constructivists who say the ideas and they somehow overcome this material reality. No, the ideas are themselves all they're not solely a product of, but they're part of material reality, right? And so that's one of the big takeaways of the book. But in any case, thank you for bearing with me. Hopefully I've had enough energy to pull you through a very hot conference room for 50 minutes. Okay, anyways, thanks.
I'm going to ask the first question, and then when Brian's answering it, if you can raise your hand, and those of you on Zoom, type your question into the Q&A or raise your hand. I'll see if I can figure out how to have you speak, but it might be better to type it up first. And my question, Brian, you have these categories about strong-willed, tough, strong. But one thing you just barely touched on is retributiveness. And we know
right.
from your work with Rachel Stein, my work with Ben Valentino, Peter Lieberman's work, that retributiveness clamps on very, or correlates very strongly with willingness to use force or willingness even to use nuclear weapons. We know from Rose McDermott's work, who I see is on the Zoom call, that
Hi, Rose.
retribution, she argues, relates strongly to evolutionary fitness, and that therefore it's baked into many individuals, and yet retribution in moral terms is usually related to justice, but in reality, retribution very easily turns into vengeance.
Yeah.
And retribution is targeted and it seeks justice. Vengeance or revenge is not targeted. It's indiscriminate often and is seeking pain. And I don't see that element coming out in this.
So it's buried, and I can explain how.
Okay, explain why. Because I'd love to hear you talk about this more, because I think this is one of the biggest issues in this question about the relationship between moral values and the use of force.
Yeah. So for me, and you don't, there's no paper associated with this, right? It's part of my moral condemnation discussion, right? And here I rely, like on the expert, I rely on Rose, who's making this distinction between negative reciprocity and retribution, right? And retribution is much more severe. And I'm thinking of them as kind of along a continuum, right? But moral condemnation is like, but it all, like, vengeance involves someone has to do something to you, right? And so it is a kind of reciprocal action. I'm retaliating against you, right? But as Rose points out in this piece, she just, this is the Texas National Security Review, right? That they're like, it's still different. The idea of reciprocity is like, hey, let's just establish again a modus vivendi here that we can live. I just want to, it's a shot across the bow. Vengeance is like, I'm going to eliminate you because you're a bad guy, right? So I'm thinking about it as gradations gradations of moral condemnation, or gradations of response driven by moral condemnation, right? And like I said, one is about eliminating the threat. The other one is about recalibrating the relationship, right? Because the idea of negative reciprocity is like, you do something to me, and I'm just going to remind you that we have a relationship here and certain expectations, right? Now, eventually, I think those dynamics oftentimes lead to the situation where the relationship is so fraught that the only response felt left is truly vengeance. And then it becomes, then it's not so much instrumental or strategic, right? But it's really about, I'm just going to hurt you because hurting you feels good. But again, like as you point out, Rose basically says that has evolutionary foundations. And I think so too does the negative reciprocity thing. I don't know if that's satisfactory, but I don't think that the case studies that I'm working with reduce solely to revenge, right? I don't think that World War I, the dynamics about World War I were about revenge. Some of the post-World War I.
So it could be really neat to look for
could be
changes of terms from justice to vengefulness, or from stopping the French military to hurting French people, or something like that.
Right. Yeah. And it could be, and you could get that escalation too in terms of the target, where like as you become more vengeful, you stop distinguishing between like a reciprocity dynamic, which is we're going to hit their military to show these bad guys that we can't be trifled with, and we're going to then escalate that because you're just French, right? You are no longer the French military. I have no doubt that that's a dynamic. I was trying to look backwards, like what's putting this all together, right? And what have we been missing? And it's this moral condemnation idea in my estimation, without saying it, without denying that you're exactly right. There could be different micro level processes working on a particular cases that in which one is more reciprocity driven and the other one is more vengeful.
Okay. Naomi, and why don't you, Brian knows some people, but not everybody, but for the sake of everybody and people on Zoom, if you could introduce yourself and what you work on.
I am Naomi Eagle. I'm a postdoc fellow here at CSAC, and my research is on multilateral agreements governing nuclear and other weapons. So it's a fascinating presentation and lots to think about. I want to pick up on the last point just before we got to the Q&A, where you said that morality evolves to help us regulate conflict. And I'm wondering if you can talk more about how morality evolves or how these different foundations for morality change, especially at the group level. And whether we're thinking about it requires some sort of existential shock or crisis, war being the big example, or whether there's a more gradual process taking place as well.
Yeah. It's an excellent question. It'll ask me to talk about Germany more, which I never stopped caring about doing. Okay, so this was a big part. So the subtitle, oh, the monkeys are gone. The subtitle of this is Evolutionary Ethics, Moral Revolutions. And this is actually the part that I kind of downplay in this particular talk, but it's there, which is that I don't want to appear as a biological determinist, right? And I'm not a biological determinist. And actually nobody who studies morality really is a biological determinist, because people they're not blind, right? They go out there and they see a lot of variation, and they understand there's a lot of variation over time in the moral codes that are governing any particular society, right? And there are certain periods of moral reckoning where like things get reconfigured and people get brought into moral circles. We, for instance, extend the notion of equality to groups that we had never even seen or were willing to talk about. That happens. Right? Okay, and yet at the same time, theorizing about that, I don't know, I can't do it. So what I come down to is that what is this fundamental, if we want to call it material basis, or I should say universal basis of morality give us, which a basis of certain moral ingredients that people combine in different ways. And as we know, at the individual level, some people score high on some of these dimensions than others, which is to say that we get variation, phenotypic variation, like someone might call that in evolutionary context, which is not all of us come out with the exact same weighting of altruism and reciprocity, maybe from the womb, but certainly not after we're done in our formative years. And our parents are a big part of that too. So just now how that shifts, I don't know, but I can show that it does shift. And it's really interesting when it does. So I want to tell you this through the mechanism, through the example of Germany. Because Germany is really fascinating when it comes to nationalism. So we think about, okay, nationalism is defining morality, right? And that's how, when we think about defining morality today, how would you measure that? Well, you do a bunch of things. And one of the things you do is you ask them about their feelings towards the nation and how much they owe it, whether they're proud of it, et cetera, whether they remain loyal to it, because it's one of our primary sources of loyalty. But nations are young. Right? Nations are not the dominant form of organization politically. Certain nations that are defined based on a particular set of group characteristics. Okay, so the idea is that there is a tendency towards in-group formation, but we can construct, and we know we can construct those group boundaries based on all kinds of ascriptive criteria, right? Like we can do it based on, like Hitler did, based on race, right? I shouldn't say just Hitler, because it's not like that's gone, right? But we can do it on the basis of culture and language, which we didn't do actually before the 1800s. We think that that's always been the order of things, but it hasn't been. Okay, so what happens in Germany? So what's interesting about Germany is that everyone thinks like, oh, German nationalism, right? It was trumped up by a bunch of elites in order to distract from the lack of domestic reforms at home, and it needed an external adversary in order to distract from the lack of reform. So let's make all the social democrats into nationalists by saying that England is scary. Right? That's the crude version of the thing. And that the nationalists did this in a very strategic way. This is so Snyder popularizes this argument in Myths of Empire, but it's an old Marxist argument, actually. It goes back to the 30s. Also has no empirical evidence whatsoever to it either, but that's a different story. Okay, here's why it's impossible. Because German nationalism is a new phenomenon that was threatening to the regime. Right? If anyone remembers the French Revolution, right? German monarchs really weren't crazy about this idea about a set of things that united the people, and the idea that somehow the sovereign worked for the people, right? That's scary to them. So what they do is the German Kaiser recognizes this as something that they can't get away from, right? And the thing about German nationalism is that it remained for a period of time in its infancy. We're talking about 1870s, post-unification on. It says everyone owes their obedience to the Kaiser, typical authority relations, and we all have to come together and deal with external threats, classic in-group loyalty. But what about when the Kaiser falls short in terms of how willing he is perceived as being willing to stand up to threats? What when the Kaiser's weak? everyone thought, and all the nationalists felt that the Kaiser was too weak because they're all hyped up on these binding morality hormones, for lack of a better word. They're all about Germany, Germany, Germany. And all of a sudden they're like, wait, the Kaiser isn't the man that we expect him to be. But we can't criticize him because the old binding morality was that king above everything. And eventually what comes to happen is that breaks. And it breaks, we don't know precisely, but it breaks in the first decade after, or the first decade of the 20th century. Moroccan crises are a big part of that. And I tell that story in this book, that you get what's called, at the time, was an oxymoron, a nationalist opposition. There couldn't be a nationalist opposition because the government there was no opposition, right? Except for the left, right? To be a nationalist was to be always pro-Kaiser. It stops being so. And that is a reconfiguring of the binding morality that I can trace. And I could say is consistent with the idea that we can reconstitute and throw in different ingredients and reconfigure these things, but I can't predict in advance. So I don't try to. And the Hitler story is the same thing. So that one I briefly alluded to. We're taking these binding notions, right, of a group, in this case, a racially defined group, right? But we're defining the very nature of that in terms of race as opposed to language, right? But it appeals to a certain sense or certain core set of old nationalists who are like, I'm not sure about how I feel about this whole race thing, but I can get behind the idea of a national thing. And that's why you get this very uneasy coalition of old German nationalists and the new German right, but they never trust each other. Hopefully that at least tells you that I'm cognizant of this kind of things.
Ian next, and then Layat after that.
Hey, great talk. Ian Reynolds. I'm a pre-doctoral fellow here at CSAC and also at the Institute for Human-Centered AI down the road over there. I wanted to talk a little bit more about your findings regarding this text analysis.
Embeddings.
Think,
okay.
Yeah. I find it really, really interesting. So are you basically able to track changes in moral constellation over time?
We could. Your idea? We could. Okay. We don't do that, right? Gotcha. We're basically treating these essentially as like a. Yeah, I think we're just all throwing them in. It's just a big cross-sectional thing. It's like the unit of analysis is a speech by a leader in a given year, right? Okay. So we could conceivably track that. So you could monitor. You could see changes in concern for human rights, conceivably, all kinds of.
Yeah, because that could be fascinating. Yeah. I mean, it sounds like in many ways, and correct me if I'm wrong, your explanation for why Germany keeps fighting is that these leaders are boxed in by their moral constellations, right?
Yeah.
They can't conceive of another. So, I mean, I'm just wondering if you've thought about how you could track those broad rhetorical trends that you see in these big data sets and then see how they're deployed in action.
Yeah. So over time, so we have a different project, Caleb and I, that is doing a longitudinal thing. It isn't doing a moral longitudinal thing, but I think you could. There's all kinds of interesting things too here where you could actually see whether, for instance, participating in a large collective body like this makes you change your moral tune, right? Because you understand that there's you got to read the room literally, right? And there's a certain set of things you can't do, and you could probably contrast that with some speeches at home. What we're interested in doing is more. We have this. I wouldn't call it a project. It's an idea, right? And we have all of the British parliamentary debates, and we're interested in basically seeing how pre and post colonization, how colonies and then independent countries are regarded. First of all, whether they become more identified with race or less over time, pre and post, things like that. So we are thinking about tracking those, and also you can project those racially loaded terms onto certain dimensions. So you can look to see basically, is there dehumanization that occurs more or less over time? Is it constant? What we do know from early analysis is that, what do we know? I can't even remember, but yes, you can do that conceivably. You can't do that, unfortunately, with the big GloVe data set, or I should say GigaWord data set, because that's really just that's like a modern piece. But I think at this time, people are scanning just huge amounts of documents. It's just a matter of finding out somebody who's doing it. But I know you can download like the British parliamentary debates in like a couple seconds. My son is supposed to be currently going through and reading this text for analysis. I put my son to work. Like my son needed an internship, and my co-author became his boss. And I'm like, do what Caleb does. And he's a junior in high school, so he's being very slow about it. But when you get it all in order, I'll come back. I'll get to talk about it.
Leah.
Hi, I'm Layat. I'm a nuclear security postdoc here at CSAC. So thank you for this talk. I'm very interested in what all here is falling under the rubric of morality. I think both historically, obviously, both on the right and the left, arguments are always political arguments are always really being advanced in moral terms.
Yes.
But yet we don't often in our writings express that, as you pointed out, right?
Yeah.
So I'm interested in, with this methodology that you've used, how do you think that that would look, accounting for, well, these are a set of political prescriptions, right, that are being offered, but they have a moral valence for like a very significant, fraction of the sort of body politic.
Mhm.
So of course, as you sort of alluded to in your talk, one man's prejudice is another man's morality, and the kind of plurality of moralities that you find, and how historically conditioned these belief systems are. I just wonder how in the book project you get your arms around just the how to suss out what is the moral, what is the political, what kind of,
Meaning, what's more instrumental? Is that what you're
and
thinking?
just in terms of there are certain political positions that the left would advance as being a moral stance, right?
Sure.
And the right would see the same thing as a moral outrage.
Sure.
But like, how do you account for that when the policy itself is sort of being batted around in this sort of broader political discourse? Basically, how do you follow politics, or how do you follow morality in a political sort of discourse when we do make such attempts to frame these issues in kind of rationalist terms, or in cost effectiveness terms, or
Yeah. First of all, I'd say stop doing that, but it's like, stop. But no, it's a good point. I don't mean to be flip. So there's a bunch of interesting things that come out of your questions, right? One is kind of my normative obligation as a scholar, which is something I struggle with in this project, right? Which is that, I tried to, I would say roughly, I took like a phenomenological approach to all this, which is like, listen, this is not my morality, but it's someone's morality. But there's a lot of really terrible stuff that I think was genuinely moral motivated, that I think is beyond the moral pale, right? Right. So, and in the Morocco case, right? I'm talking about a case in which there's a conflict between Germany and a bunch of other states with power, political, imperial interest in the in North Africa, and right. And they, in none of these countries is anyone concerned at all with how the Moroccans feel about it, right? And so they're outraged that they're not being treated fairly and justly, right? Germany's interests aren't being respected in Morocco, right? In a way that we couldn't possibly understand today, right? And so, yeah, like, is that, now the question is like, what are my choices there? Is it phenomenological? I just say, okay, I read this and I try to figure out, they actually feel this way and not judge. The other way, but then you're always worried about, right? Are you normalizing it? Are you reifying it, right? Or basically excusing it by doing so. And I haven't figured out a way of squaring that circle, right? So I always take the phenomenological end. The second thing that I think the second point I would draw out of that discussion is that there's a lot of strategizing over. I don't mean to say that everything is always driven genuinely by morality, but everyone always has to appear to be genuinely driven by morality. There's very little in politics that's basically like, I want that. Why? Because I want it. Because it's good for me, right? It just doesn't happen. That's not how humans work. We always have to justify things in terms of the interests of some broader group, because that's what dilutes the selfishness. So every leader, I don't think there's an authoritarian leader alive, right, who says like, this is going to be the case because I want. And to the extent that there is, they have to say they're endowed by God to be able to say that. Right? That's where it comes from. It's the divine. Well, like God told me, so that's why you have to do what I say. But no one basically just says, you're going to do what I say because I said so, and I have the ability to beat you up. The question is why, right? And so there's all kinds of, if I were to write a book just about politics in general, right? And what I think the nature of politics is, I might call it hypocrisy, right? Politics is hypocrisy. But the question for me is like, why is hypocrisy necessary, right? Why can't you just say, I'm powerful, I'm going to do what I want? We don't do that, even in societies in which that is possible, where the powerful can do that if they want, because you're always looking for that moral legitimacy. So you always have to be aware of the instrumental uses and the strategic uses of morality. And when you start to look for them, you will see them. You cannot read a story in the New York Times without finding that, right? Someone's strategic representation of a situation, right? In moral terms to frame it a particular way, right? You will find it everywhere. I think so I think in that sense, you're exactly right. It's a lot of just pure politics, right? In this case, the rationalists are right. They just have to be able to bring that into a framework rather than just pretending that somehow we're all playing a game out there in which everyone is laying exactly what they want out on the table, because that is not the case. We're trying to attract some third parties generally to our cause, and we always do that through, not always, but I would say 9 times out of 10 do that through morality. Hopefully that answers your question. Or at least-
I want to have a two-finger on that before turning to Dean and then Ann Clunan, who's
Ann Clunan's here.
She's online. Yeah.
Hi, Ann.
I noticed when the brief time I was in the government that there was this weird phenomenon that in our daily life, we often do exactly what you're talking about. We cloak our interests in the language of morality. It's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And it's really
I've been to a faculty
we want
meeting.
to
I
do.
know what it's like.
Okay. I noticed in the government, people would cloak their ethical interest in realist arguments about interest.
Oh yeah, I can see
Because
that.
it's not acceptable.
Right.
You can't say that's a wrong thing to do. You have to say that's not an interest. So think about, for example, Henry Stimson in arguing that we should not destroy Kyoto. He talks to Groves and says, well, this is just wrong. It's such a beautiful place and it's not having much impact.
Right.
And he said, oh yeah, and moreover, if we do this, it'll hurt our chances to get the Japanese people to go along with us after the war.
Right.
And Groves gets that. So when Stimson meets Truman later, he drops the ethics stuff.
Right.
But
it's still ethics. There is still ethics stuff. Is what's good for the United States, right? How do we win the war? How do we save American boys, right? So it's there.
Well, no,
right?
that was that's a self-interest or it's an interest for what's going to keep the peace afterwards, but it's not a inherently wrong argument. And he drops the ethical argument. And do you see that kind of I find it to be a bit of a paradox that in one sphere we cloak our interest in ethics, and the other sphere we cloak our.
So I mean, here I'd be. I think I'd just be a constructivist. That when you're participating in government, right, your overriding objective is to work for what you think to be as the public good, and therefore, and you're a public servant, right? You owe that your deference, and therefore, what that might lead to those kind of paradoxical situations that you're talking about. What I'd be curious about is, has that changed over time, right? In the sense that like liberal cosmopolitanism. So when definitely what I've observed is like historically, when you go back and you look at like, I did a book on post-war institution building, and it's all about how the United States can get its interests, right? Just all of it, right? And yet now, like we think about these collective security institutions as normatively good, right? And so and the people who are very pro UN, et cetera, right, endorse this for a different point of view. I also wonder if this, and State Department officials are, it seems to me nowadays, more cosmopolitan minded than they were, say, 50 years ago. And I wonder if that's because just of a general normative change in the types of people who get recruited and what the nature of highly educated public servants is, if it shifts over time, if they're simply just less nationalistic than they used to, less in-group oriented, and therefore, but they're participating in an environment with the Defense Department, right? Always be like, yeah, what about American interests? Oh yeah, it's good for those too, right? Also the big problem, everything is motivated. So you can't trust anybody, right? Because like, not only is this good ethically, it's also good for our interests, right? And you're just like, no one in the world admits trade-offs in government work, right? And so like, that makes it really hard to study, because then you're an archivist like me or a historian. You go in, you're like, if you're talking, like, it's one thing if you're writing your buddy and you're writing them a letter, right? I take those more seriously than if they're writing a memo. Because I don't trust any, like you can call that private correspondence that reveals their true preferences. No, it doesn't, right? It reveals what they think is going to work in the room. And so therefore there's this tendency to like every single argument is in favor of your point of view, right? Because you're trying to win a rhetorical battle in a meeting, right? And so, yeah, and so then that raises the question, like, do we ever know anything? And then you just kind of cry and go home, right? Because because that's our thing, right? The qualitative people are like, but we read the documents. And like, if I say, oh, the documents don't really matter, like, oh no, what do we do now? I guess we have to go learn how to do word embeddings analysis. It's like, I don't like math.
Dean.
Thanks so much. I really enjoyed your presentation.
Introduce yourself to.
I'm sorry. My name is Dean Winslow. It's a name, not a title. But I am a professor of medicine at the med school.
You need to be Dean Wilson.
Exactly.
Or Winslow, sorry.
And then I'm a part-time faculty here at CSAC, FSI. And by the way, it's a real honor to be included in these events. But I wanted to push back a little bit on, I think that on the last slide you showed, with the statistical correlations, between.
You want me to put it back up, or?
I don't think you need to necessarily, but it's kind of belief systems, and that there are high correlations between like sort of authoritarian kind of ideals, and then not as much, on the right side of the slide. And I think that's actually, you hit on something that's really important. And I also, by the way, served 35 years as a flight surgeon in the United States Air Force. And one of the things that I think that the military still does a really good job is actually teaching about the importance of morality, even while projecting strength. And, I think I speak for just 99% of us, who served downrange, in Iraq and Afghanistan during our recent wars, that we were cognizant every minute that we were there, that, yes, we were fighting bad guys and we were fighting for our country, but the people, the Iraqis and the Afghans were not our enemies.
Right.
And I think that's something, though, that unfortunately people like Ted Cruz and Donald Trump didn't understand. I remember in the 2016 primaries, they were talking about, Trump actually was advocating, well, we should just kidnap the children and women of ISIS and kill them.
Yeah.
That way we'd stop them. That's horrible.
Yeah.
And Ted Cruz said, well, we should just turn the sand to glass.
Carpet bomb.
And, carpet bomb them. And, that's the kind of things that just makes any military officer, particularly, one who's been to war college, just cringe. So I think that one of the things that we need to do is make sure that the leaders that we elect that do have responsibility for policy really understand the importance of always having a moral compass. Good, again, and I'll shut up after this. But
No, I want you to keep going. I want to make. I agree.
Again, one of the things like that I just loved about Jim is, he, knows more about Thomas Aquinas and Marcus Aurelius, and philosophers than I ever will. But
you knew them personally, so that's
exactly, yeah. But he also, though, understood that, well, again, be kind, be considerate, be polite, but have a plan to kill everybody in the room,
if necessary.
I was going to say it, and I personally, always carried a automatic weapon when I went outside the wire. I had no illusions about how dangerous it was. But at the same time, too, I think that, the military actually is doing a good job, teaching what you're talking about.
Right. So I want to point
ahead, be very brief in answering this. We've got two other questions.
I want to point out something here. So, and I agree with everything you're saying. People who have dangerous moral beliefs, that doesn't say that they don't believe that these are moral values. It means that this actually gives you no leverage in predicting the degree to which some people find that to be an important moral trait or another. Which is to say that dangerous people who have dangerous moral beliefs, and we can call them right of the political spectrum or whatever, they not only find these to be extremely important moral values, but compared to people who believe that the world is a safer place, believe these things also have moral valence, right? So they have a broader moral inventory, right? It's not just all about these things. So I don't want to give the impression, right, that that the right is low on these things, because I think you're exactly right. One of the things I do in this book, didn't do in this talk, is basically is write about how there's that in-group love does not equal out-group hate, right? Which is, I find, everywhere in this discipline, and there is basically no evidence for it. That most out-group most outgroup, it's all about in-group favoritism. Like if you're in a shrinking ship, who do you save, right? But it's not like I dislike this person. It's that there's scarce resources, right? And therefore I'm going to prioritize my own in-group, and rarely, to the extent that we draw these boundaries, it's almost always in the context of threat. It's never in the context of hatred, right? And there's some really bright people, including Robert Sapolsky here, who have written some, I think, dangerous articles otherwise that get the science wrong, which they shouldn't because they're scientists. And that there's basically, yeah. And so that's an important part, that I think what in-group loyalty people do is that they tend to see more of a need to draw a tighter circle because they can't have everything.
I have Ann Clunan next, and Ann, I've permitted you to speak and use your microphone. If you choose not to, or I did this incorrectly, I'll read your question. But you do the first one about Ukraine?
Sure. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Hi, Ann.
Hey, Brian, good to see you. Love to talk.
Good to hear you.
And I think that Ernie would love it too. But
that makes sense.
I want to push you to try to apply this framework to what's going on in Ukraine, in particular to the end state and war termination and the positions of the United States and Russia, right? I mean, we can easily sort of transpose the morality question to the Ukrainians because they've been so courageous. But what do you think this implies for the end game?
Thank you, Ann.
I'm not optimistic. Everything about this feels bad to me. One of the things I did and I didn't present this, I can show it real quick up here. I did, with that same Russian sample, I did a panel experiment that was meant to mimic a war termination scenario similar to Germany World War I, which is basically, I give you a scenario in which the United States and Russians are fighting with some small number of casualties, and then the casualties start to get really bad for the Russians and the US isn't, and then how far do you stay in it? Right. And then I do two things. When I measure their commitment to binding moral foundations, right? And then there's some experimental manipulations in which I remind them of the pragmatic consequentialist point of view, which is a lot of people are dying for no reason, right? And then the other, which is, soldiers are going to die in vain. And basically the findings is that, well, first of all, binding morality is associated with this huge decrease in the hazard ratio, meaning you're much more likely to stay in if you believe in these binding moral values. It's much bigger than any of the treatment effects. Second thing, that the people who stay in longer escalate their demands over time, which is not rational under any circumstances, right? So their reservation price, I'm asking them after every round, you're losing more soldiers, how much of the territory do you feel like you need to keep? And it goes up. Not very much, but statistically significant, goes up. Should not be going up, right? And then the third, of those people who continue all the way and are going up, it goes up even more if I remind you, if I give you this moral escalatory prompt, right, about the soldiers dying in vain. And what we don't know is, one, is Putin a binding moralist? I think he probably is, right? He could just be some power-hungry idiot who wants to stay in power at all costs, and maybe he's rational, or maybe he's not. Maybe he's going to gamble for resurrection because he feels insecure, and Hein Goemans is right? If it's this, it's not good. I don't know also, it's if he cares about what the public thinks and how much of the public, this is just an individual level variable, right? But I don't know the point at which 60%, 70% turns against the war, because I'm not modeling the war, right? I'm modeling a hypothetical situation. I don't really know where the Russian people are on this. And so if he cares about them, where they are. But I don't like the dynamics, because I think we've got a lot of the flip side on the Ukrainian side too, which is just, so I'm pinning this all on binding moralism, but there's a degree of binding moralism that occurs in every war, right? You don't have to just be conservative to feel this, right? Once you decide that the other guy's a bad guy and has done something wrong to you, it's very hard for you to say, let's just settle this and they can have the Donbass, right? You can't swallow that, right? It just hurts. And so none of this feels very good as far as the end game. But I was playing around with the idea of maybe writing this up and writing an op-ed on it. I don't feel responsible doing it. I don't like to intervene in the public sphere. I don't feel like I ever know enough to do so. So I have refrained from doing so.
The last question will go to Rose McDermott. And Rose, if you're online and can speak, I see that you're
Can you
muted
hear
now,
me?
but yes,
She's
we can
here.
now.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Hi, Scott. Hi, Brian. Thanks for really interesting talk. And I know we're almost at the end of time, but I'm really curious theoretically how you see the distinction between your evolutionary arguments about morality and the existing evolutionary arguments about religion. And specifically, I get your claim about cooperation, but the evolutionary arguments about religion are more about social constraint than they are about cooperation. And so I'm really curious how you see or whether you see those things related. And, here I'm thinking mostly of the work of Pascal Boyer, but, Edward Slingerland, there's the BBS piece that Pascal did with Michael Bang-Peterson. I mean, there's a couple of these kinds of arguments in that way that takes a much more constraining than cooperative view. And I'm just curious how you see theoretically those things relating to your argument.
Yeah, so I mean, just very shortly, I think that you don't need religion to have morality, right? It does help, but then there's this question of what is it just that religion is doing, right? And here I'm thinking of this. Who came up with this idea? Like if Dominic Johnson did it, but then no, that's not true. Someone did it, tried to overturn Dominic Johnson's argument about the importance of religion. Like there's a distinction between religions where you have an all-knowing God who's watching you morally.
Yeah, I think that's the Edward Slingerland thing.
Yeah, and then others, right? And I'm kind of trying to dodge that. But you're right. I think it's a weakness. I really didn't want to get into the whole Gottesmitteln thing that was going on in Germany at the time. But I think just in general, people, and there's also this question about, does religion affect your morality? Or are you drawn to be religious by a need for certain moral values, which is also here. And so I don't really know.